ready to
Everyone. Are we ready, James?
Yeah, so I think we're good to go. Thanks for the intro, Maya. So do you want to share my screen now? Everybody can see?
Yes, everybody can see the screen. James, thank you very much for joining us today at the GoDaddy Pro EMEA meetup. Today's topic, I think it's the topic of all of us working in marketing and thinking how to make success. We have so many people coming and joining from the different parts of the world to hear the news. So without further ado, without any other delay, please, the floor is yours, and let's learn something new about modern content.
Thanks for the excellent intro there, Maya, and thanks everybody for attending the talk. And as you just heard, I'm here to talk about modern content creation and different strategies that can help you achieve success on the web. So just to introduce myself, my name is James and I work at 10up, and I work closely with the Google team on various collaborations. I come from a web design background myself, so I'm sure many of you guys are web designers, and I'm based in Ireland. Some of you might have noticed by my accent. So yeah, that's all about me, and we'll get straight into it. So when I visit a website like you guys, I have certain expectations from the site I'm visiting. I want content that is useful and interactions that are smooth and predictable. Site owners and developers, likewise, they all have their own expectations of a website. They want websites that are visually appealing, a sufficient monetization strategy, or some additional features that are modern and trendy at the time. So while content may be king, there are considerations when it comes to creating content and maintaining a successful site. Some of these are impact on performance, usability, and accessibility. So we're going to go into these further during the talk. So typically, site owners, you'll see in the screen there, site owners and developers aim for a great user experience while also trying to balance their business goals. So if you're looking to get a good visitor retention, there are various aspects often less considered during the web design or development stages. Visitors to your website, they don't want continuous loading, they don't want non-responsive scrolling, or they don't want content shifting, which is super frustrating, especially on mobile when you're reading something and something just pops up and it just delays your reading experience. All these result in poor bounce rates and users end up leaving your website. And they will remember, as many of you know, I visit a lot of websites myself and I kind of know which ones I'm going to have a bad experience from, and it kind of makes me look for alternatives. So it is super important. And this is where Core Web Vitals comes into play. And these are a set of different metrics related to speed, responsive, and visual stability. We have the largest contentful paint, which is corresponding to loading, the first input delay, which corresponds with interactivity, also the cumulative layout shift, which corresponds to stability, all which we've seen in the previous slide. Largest contentful paint, it measures your loading performance. So it's the render time from the largest content element visible within your viewport. And site owners should always aim for a score of under 2.5 seconds when it comes to largest contentful paint. And we will show you how to measure your site when it comes to Core Web Vitals further during the talk. What causes largest contentful paint? There's various factors. Slow server response times. There's render blocking JavaScript and CSS, slow resource load times, and client-side rendering. When it comes to first input delay, this measures your interactivity, the time from when a user first interacts with the page until the time when the browser is actually able to respond to that interaction. Factors impacting first input delay include long tasks, long JavaScript execution time, large JavaScript bundles, and render blocking JavaScript. When it comes to cumulative layout shift, this measures your visual stability. It's a sum of all unexpected layout shifts that occur throughout the lifespan of the page. And recommended target score is under 0.1 when it comes to cumulative layout shift. Factors that impact cumulative layout shift are images without dimensions, ads, embeds, iframes without dimensions, dynamically injected content, and web fonts. So if you want to improve your core web vitals, there's many different methods you can do so. Some of these include not sending content that the user is not requesting. Sometimes many of us might be inclined to add new features to your website, but you've really got to consider the performance and the experience of the end user. I would also say it's important to employ an efficient caching strategy. It can result in much faster load times. And I would say to ensure you're using reliable and renowned web hosting, something I'm sure Moya would like to expand on. And of course, ensure you're always doing ongoing testing and performance testing. It's super important. Your website might be fast today. Who knows further down the line, without you having made changes to your website even, who knows what might happen. So much different factors. Also, it's important to make use of modern web technologies. Lazy loading, a few years ago, many people didn't hear of lazy loading. Now it should be a part of all websites. Images as well. As a former web designer, images can just be a big problem for end users and people updating their website, but it's a good way to just get a better performance score by making small image improvements. Images should always be small and not too large in file size. There's many services and free services too, Scoosh.app, which you'll see on the screen there. That's one really simple to use service where you can dramatically reduce the file size of an image without any visual differences for the end user. Also, you should use responsive images where possible. So if you're your WordPress users, a lot of these things are taken care of by default by src set images types. And also lazy loading, which we mentioned. Lazy loading as well, it's also built into WordPress, as in one of the previous versions. And also use modern formats. So if you're uploading images that are GIFs or some of the older formats, they do end up resulting in larger file sizes. So they're not the most optimum. So always use modern file formats. JavaScript and CSS advice, less is more. You don't need to include everything on every single page of your website. In many cases, if you have a subscription pop-up or other things, do you really need them on all pages? Load them later where possible. So it's important to consider the placement of the scripts you add to your website. And also consider the libraries you're using. So you might have, do you really need a full JavaScript library of jQuery, for example, if you're only using a very small section of that library? So maybe there are alternatives when it comes to different libraries you could be using. And also you could separate an inline critical CSS, which also can bring a good performance boost without too much effort as well. So that brings us to AMP. So AMP can help us with all the above considerations. And AMP, I'm not sure if you know, feel free to drop in the comments if you're familiar with AMP. But AMP is basically a web components framework. It's fully loaded with software engineering best practices built in. And I will say AMP as well, it's not just for mobile. So one of the many misconceptions is that AMP is just for mobile. It's evolved a lot over time and it will continue to do so. And it can be used as a framework just to make sure you're on top of your core web vitals. So AMP, it encourages modern web development best practices. It provides compelling, smooth, and near instantaneous loading experiences. It provides security and stability benefits. And also AMP provides a collection of responsive and accessible components. And components is one of the top features in AMP. We'll talk about it briefly, but if you get to know any of the different AMP components and how they work, they can be really useful, even if you're not using AMP on your website. So they're a big part of AMP, the AMP framework, and I definitely recommend testing out the components. AMP is also open source and scalable, so it can be applied to many different projects. Largest content for paint with AMP. AMP uses an intelligent resource loading mechanism. When you're using AMP, resources are also preloaded and pre-rendering and use pre-rendering. Also, there is very restricted performance impacting custom JavaScript. So one of the big things about AMP is it does limit the JavaScript you can use, and that's just to make sure your website performs as best as it could. So JavaScript is typically responsible for a lot of websites' poor performance, if not implemented correctly. And also one of the big features of AMP is if you have valid AMP URLs, they're eligible to be served from AMP cache. And we'll talk about that briefly as well, AMP cache. First, input delay with AMP. When you're using AMP, resources are loaded asynchronously, and also it uses a deferred layout system. It makes use of chunked processes. And when it comes to iframes, ads, and other features, they're contained in a sandbox environments, which provide additional security benefits and with no unexpected behavior. Cumulative layout shift with AMP. AMP deploys a static layout system. So it means less browser calculations and it's just a faster loading experience. There are also predefined dimensions for iframes and embeds. And users can expect no strange shifts when it comes to browsing your website. It just provides a more pleasant and end user experience. AMP cache. Every single valid AMP URL is automatically eligible to be served from AMP cache. I'm not sure if you want to leave in the notes if you're familiar with AMP cache, but basically AMP cache works similar to a CDN. Basically, if your website is found by Google search or any of the other search engines that support AMP, the first land on your website could be directed from AMP cache. It means less server strain from your own hosting provider and all subsequent visits on your website. So any internal links are coming from your own origin server. So it's super useful as well. Like a CDN, if you have an audience, if you have web hosting locally, say you're based in New York and your website is has a kind of a global appeal, so your audience is based around the world. If someone visits your website from somewhere like Tokyo, Sydney, when you're using AMP cache, that content would be served from the nearest AMP server to that end user. So it can really bring a really easy to use performance boost. You don't have to do anything. Basically, like I said, every single AMP URL is eligible to be served from AMP cache. AMP components.
James, sorry to interrupt you. I think that Barry actually had a comment on your previous slide saying that you need an acronym legend page for reference. I don't know if can you connect it to the context, what Barry meant, or should we ask him to ask the question live?
Yeah, do you want to expand on that, Barry, and hopefully I can help out?
Yeah, that would be awesome, Barry. If you'd like, just hit me in the message section, and I will make you in a presenter mode. Maybe we can get a little bit more depth into the conclusion that you made.
Yeah, one thing Barry could be talking about as well is AMP. A lot of people, AMP was initially accelerated mobile pages, and it did expand. It's not just for mobile. So I can give you many examples as well of websites using AMP across the board, fully. Basically, their website is fully AMP. So it's not just for mobile. So it's not considered accelerated mobile pages anymore. It's just AMP. So hopefully, maybe that's what best practice I'm using. Okay. Okay, Barry. So hopefully that answered it. Best practice in using acronyms.
What each letter stands for.
Yeah. So at the moment, AMP is just AMP at the moment, AMP. Previously it was accelerated mobile pages. So, but that's a good point, Barry. I should have mentioned that earlier. So yeah, it's just AMP at the moment. So if any of you guys have any more questions, feel free to just pop them in the chat. So AMP components are a collection of ready-to-made scripts for various functionality. So in the same way you add Google Fonts or jQuery scripts, you can add any of these components from the AMP library. And some of these components, they're all free and they're optimized for performance. You can see yourself, they're all fully open source, so you can check them out on the AMP HTML GitHub. Some of the popular components, they're for sidebars. If you have, especially these days, a lot of people like the hamburger menu, not just on mobile. They like to have the hamburger menu next to their horizontal menu. You could use AMP sidebar for this. That's one of the more popular components. For slideshows, there is AMP carousel, there's accordions via AMP-accordion, and video docking, and many, many more. There's just a huge collection of components, and bento AMP, which it also is quite a recent change. It means you can use these components on non-AMP pages. So if you guys are looking to add a accordion style FAQ section to kind of drop down to when the user clicks, test out the AMP accordion. These components are super useful, and we don't have time to go into it today, but AMP email is another technology, which means you can use these components inside emails. So might be interesting for some of you guys who like to send out newsletters. If you like a slideshow or some interactivity within emails, components are, you might want to consider testing out the components. So next we'll talk about, so AMP for WordPress. So I'm sure many of you guys are WordPress users. The official AMP plugin was initially built by Automatic, which does have a large contributor base, and now it's evolved quite a lot. Many Google engineers work on it, and many other companies and contributors work on this plugin. So it has a huge amount of benefits. It makes it a lot easier to achieve an AMP website if you're using a plugin such as this than if you were to try to create an AMP site manually. The plugin has three different modes. Reader and transitional mode mean you can have an AMP version of your content running alongside your non-AMP version. And in this case, search engines determine the most appropriate version to be served to end users, because you do have two different versions. Reader mode is in particularly useful for users who are using WordPress themes that are not fully AMP compatible. You can choose a different theme for your AMP URLs, and your non-AMP URLs won't change whatsoever. Everything will remain the way it was. Transitional mode is a great way for comparing the performance of your AMP URLs versus your non-AMP URLs, and it can be used as a kind of a process to go fully AMP on your website. So if you find your AMP URLs are loading much faster than your non-AMP URLs, you might want to consider going fully AMP via standard mode. So that's how the three different modes work briefly. Content creation with the AMP plugin. There's quite a few aspects to the plugin that can help when it comes to building content. The plugin does highlight any AMP validation errors, whether that's custom JavaScript or some different CSS rules that are output when you're creating content. The plugin will highlight these. And this is all based on the plugin helps you to achieve a high performance website. Also, there are a large amount of AMP compatible plugins and themes. We'll discuss a couple of them in a moment. And with many modern block-based plugins, there's less of a need to maintain multiple content-focused plugins when it comes to these block plugins, because lots of them have multiple plugins built into one, really, with the new WordPress block editor. You can also preview your AMP URLs when you're using the plugin, so you can see what does work, what doesn't work, and you can just visually see the differences when you're trying to go fully AMP with your website. Go theme. This is one of the themes I use. It's actually a GoDaddy theme, but it's fully AMP compatible. It's progressive and open source. You can check it out on GitHub. You can contribute yourself. And for accessibility, it's great as well. It has all the ARIA labels, and yeah, you can definitely check it out. And it's on the WordPress themes repository. So if you have a test website, why not give it a try, in particular with the AMP plugin. CoBlocks plugin, also built by GoDaddy. It offers a huge amount of different blocks. Some of these blocks, you would typically need to install different plugins for the same functionality, and they're all built into this one blocks plugin. You have a pricing table blocks, masonry gallery blocks, a hero block, if you were like a kind of a showcase image on the top of your homepage, events blocks, carousels, and accordions. There's a huge amount. You could probably even do a talk alone on this blocks plugins, and this isn't the only one. Lots of these blocks plugins have different features, different functionality, but basically they can result in you having less plugins on your website, which is great. Accessibility with AMP, it is a top priority going forward, and basically AMP components have accessibility features built in already. There is also a user interface and accessibility working group that looks after accessibility with AMP and also looking on how to improve aspects of accessibility. Various components have ARIA labels and tags built in. When it comes to the components, again, you can test out the components. They have what's known as a playground. So if you do a search for any of these components, you can test out how they look, how they work, how accessibility works with these components before you implement them on your website. Now, examples of some AMP websites. There's a huge amount really. So I've put a link to a couple of websites where you can see some examples. amp.dev, you'll see some success stories, and you'll see some success stories when it comes to monetization, visual appearance, and PageSpeed Insights, basically different examples of general AMP websites. Also with WordPress, if you go to the official plugin website, amp-wp.org, there's a huge collection of showcases from all different business sectors or business types or website types. So you'll find a huge amount of AMP examples there. They're all using AMP on the showcase, whether it's in transitional or standard mode. So now web stories, moving on to web stories. Have any of you guys, are you familiar with web stories? Anybody want to pop in the chat? Well, anyway, just to keep on topic with modern content creation, I'll just give you a talk briefly about web stories. A couple of you guys said you need to know more about them. Great. Well, I'm not going to expand too much on them, but I just thought I'd add them into the talk. So basically, they're a modern way to engage an audience who enjoy the swipe type functionality made popular with services such as Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok. With web stories, a lot of people don't realize they're actually built on AMP components as well. So pure CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. So on the front end, they might look trendy and glamorous, but at the back end, they're traditional websites, really built with standard website technology. Web stories are also for the open web with you in control. You can easily share and link your stories, add buttons and different swipe effects. You can place ads in between your stories if you like, so you control the monetization aspect. And you can also insert analytics tracking IDs between your stories. So you'll know exactly how much hits you're getting on your website, which is super useful. If you decide to make a AMP story version of a particular post or page using WordPress, for example, you could make that into a story format as well. And you can see exactly how much hits you're getting, see how popular are your stories compared to your regular content. Also, when it comes to web stories, they don't expire after a certain amount of days. You're in control of when they expire. You can publish them whenever you like. And yeah, they're built on the AMP framework as well. So they they're optimized for performance. So web stories, many of you might be interested to know, there is a WordPress plugin. It allows you to easily create stories from within your WordPress dashboard. There is a WYSIWYG creation tool, making it super easy to create your own stories. It has drag and drop capabilities. And there's also some third-party imagery and video options. What I found interesting last week in one of these talks, is they were talking about a service called Over. So if you have a service called Over, you can import your own graphics or images into your stories. And you can make some consistent intros and exit for your stories. Also, there is an accessibility tab. So that's one excellent development with the WordPress plugin. And yeah, if you guys haven't tested it out, it's I would recommend doing so. Web stories as well. There are big things planned when it comes to Google for stories. Your web stories can show up in Google search today. I will say it's not rolled out to all regions as of yet. It's still early days when it comes to stories, but you will find out more if you go onto the dedicated Google Search Central webpage. At the moment, stories can be found in the carousel format on Google Discover. They can also be found in the grid view on Google Search. So similar on the mobile, for example, if you do a search for Google Images or videos, there is a story section, depending on where you're based, on what you're searching for. Also, in an image search, stories can be found in the form of an image card with the web stories icon. So yeah, it's I'd recommend testing it out. WordPress plugin is ready to go, ready to use. So next we'll discuss some tools to measure your core web vitals. This is going back to just making sure you're maintaining success on the web and keeping on top of your performance. So Lighthouse is have any of you guys heard of Lighthouse? I would imagine a lot of developers have in particular. No? Well, anyway, Lighthouse is a useful technology for developers looking to audit a website against modern web performance best practices. Did you have some comments on that, Maya? I see you popping up.
No, I'm just popping up because of the Lighthouse. Yeah, I just wanted to make the same comment, how it's being used. But I see from the chat that people are seriously enjoying what you're saying, and there are so many praises about the current information. So please continue.
I will do. Thank you. So basically, Lighthouse provides personalized advice on how to improve your website across various metrics: performance, accessibility, PWA, SEO, and best practices. It also measures core web vitals and highlights actionable guidance on exactly what to fix. So there is a shortcode link to Lighthouse there, and it, again, open source and provides super useful insights for website owners. PageSpeed Insights, it's a useful tool for developers trying to understand how real-world users experience your site. When it comes to PageSpeed Insights, your data is split into field and lab data. Useful to distinguish between simulated metrics on a single device and also real-world data. And PageSpeed Insights actually is built on Lighthouse technology. So previously when we spoke about Lighthouse, Lighthouse is built in and part of PageSpeed Insights. There's various ways to run Lighthouse or PageSpeed Insights tests. For if you're using Chrome, if you open up Chrome Developer Tools, it's actually built into the browser. So if you click on the Audit tab after opening Chrome Developer Tools, and if you guys don't know, feel free to pop in the chat, but it's quite easy. Once you open Chrome Developer Tools, click on the Audit tab, and you'll see an option to run a Lighthouse score there. You just basically press the Audit button and wait for calculations. There's also PageSpeed Insights web interface. I'm sure many of you guys used it. It's just a super handy way to check your performance, make sure you're keeping on top of things. And for those who really want to get their hands dirty, or guys who prefer to code, if you want, you can also run Lighthouse performance scores using a command line interface. When you're using the command line interface, you can also batch process lots of websites. So super useful if you're a web designer with lots of websites, you want to see what's performing well, what could be performing better. Also, there is a Core Web Vitals report in Search Console. So this is useful for highlighting field data based on the Chrome Experience Guide. So I know Maya, super interested in page experience. So yeah, it's built into Search Console as well, and it just provides you some useful insights. There's also Chrome extension, the Web Vitals extension, and this measures core Web Vitals in real time for desktop Google Chrome users. Next, I'm going to talk about Sidekit, and Sidekit is another useful tool. This is for WordPress users, and it just make sure you're keeping on top of all these monitoring tools and all these Google products baked into your website. So now Sidekit, it's a one-stop solution to deploy, manage, and get insights from these essential Google tools just to make sure your site is successful. It brings together all these tools into one plugin, all manageable from within your WordPress dashboard. There's a link there you'll see in the screen, sidekit.withgoogle.com, or if you want to just log into your WordPress site, do a search in the plugin repository. Some of the features of Sidekit: it's super easy to set up and configure. It's free, open source, and built by Google engineers. It provides overall site and per page insights. So again, super useful just to browse one of the pages on your website. If you're logged in, you can use the admin toolbar, and you can see exactly metrics for that specific page. Or likewise, in the admin panel, you can check your site overall, as well as using PageSpeed Insights. You can also view your data across different reporting periods when using Sidekit. So if you want to compare your site this week compared to a 30-day report. It's just super useful for doing that without having to leave your WordPress dashboard. In Sidekit, data is consolidated into easy-to-read dashboard with various widgets. So I'm sure some of you guys have used Sidekit, so feel free to leave your comments there. It's one of the plugins I do help support. You'll often find me in the WordPress support forums answering end users. So yeah, I'd love to hear your insights on the plugin. When you're using your admin dashboard, you can also view the most popular content and top earning pages. And that's one of the big pulling points with Sidekit. People like to see, people who typically wouldn't log into their AdSense or analytics account, they don't really need to when they're using Sidekit. It's all there within your admin dashboard. So very useful, and we'll just expand on the different tabs as well that you can use. For PageSpeed Insights, that can be run within your Sidekit dashboard, and it does give you a breakdown, summarizes lots of the content, and it separates it into lab and field data. So yeah, if you want to quickly see how your website is performing, I definitely recommend activating the PageSpeed Insights module. Search Console too, it allows you to see how your website is performing across Google search. It does this across various metrics, and for more detailed insights, each connected service has links to view further details on the individual Google services interface. For Google Analytics, you can view breakdowns of where your traffic sources are, all within Sidekit. It shows your viewer location and the devices used to access your site. So again, you don't need to access the Analytics web interface. It's all there within your Analytics tab in your Google Sidekit dashboard. Makes it super easy also to see where your visitors are coming from, the sessions, the bounce rates, and the average time spent on your site. These are all tools, as you guys all know, very important. If you want to maintain a successful website, you need to understand how your visitors are interacting with your website. So it's one of the most popular Google services built into Sidekit. AdSense, it offers a really effective monetization approach for website owners. So Sidekit can submit your site for approval on the AdSense network, or if you're already using AdSense, the plugin provides useful metrics while providing the ability to insert ad code on your site. So again, if you have a WordPress website and you don't use AdSense, if you've been considering using it, if you install Sidekit, the plugin can submit your site for approval. And if you are an AdSense user, it's just useful insights without having to leave your AdSense dashboard. And I find it useful as well for particular pages. You can see how each page is performing. So if you write content regularly, it might just give you just makes it really easy to see how that page or post is performing. Sidekit also allows users to implement Google Tag Manager on their site. So this is a benefit for people who don't like to touch their site. I'm sure some of you guys have had problems, whether it's with yourselves or with clients, suggesting that how to implement Google Tag Manager on your site. So Sidekit just makes the process really easy. It's just a matter of connecting the AdSense, connecting the Tag Manager module, and then just choosing whichever Tag Manager container you like. We spoke briefly on AMP as well. So Sidekit does support AMP containers. So if you're using Google Tag Manager, you can have an AMP container and a separate web container, just to make sure you have this Tag Manager's tags placed on both versions of your site. For those looking to perform different experiments or A/B testing on your sites, you can use Optimize, which is also one of the Google products built into Sidekit. It's super easy. Once you connect the Optimize module, you just insert your container code. And again, you just don't have to manually insert snippets on your site. So it's a lot safer as well. Besides being easy to use, it's a lot safer if you're suggesting clients use it as well. So that's basically how Sidekit works on your site. And if you have a WordPress website, give it a try. We'd love to hear how you're finding it. It's open source as well, so you guys can certainly make suggestions, submit feature requests, or just mention what you'd like to see changed with the plugin. It's available from the WordPress plugin repository, or on the plugin you can submit feature requests on the plugin's GitHub. So that's it for generally what we did. Go through quite a few things today. I'm sure I'd love to hear some questions from you guys. And yeah, that's more or less it.
That's awesome. I think we need to give you 30 seconds at least to drink a bit of water and then to refresh.
Wait for some questions.
Yes. Now we have actually not a question, but a statement. Kim is saying that after installing the Sitekit for the first time on one of my websites, enjoying it so far.
Oh,
So,
great.
oh yeah, maybe we can get some. I mean, if anyone would like to join us for the live discussion, please do so. James, you might want to stop sharing your screen so
I
other
will, yeah.
participants might join us. Thanks a lot for this beneficial presentation by Amber. So guys, if you don't mind, I will just go through the bookmark that I have here, and I'll put you all in a presenter mode. And if you don't want, you can always just decline it. But I would really like to get to understand who you are, what you do, how you found this presentation. If there is anything that you would like perhaps to change, or if you would like to add something, here it is. Lokesh, if you have time. Shanta, here it is.
And
Suman.
oh, we have someone. And also, guys,
Lokesh.
hi, Lokesh.
Hi, James. Uh, so yeah, it was a very good presentation and quite informative. Um, so I actually sort of, have been in this space, not professionally though, but I still have some dilemma, when it comes to site speed and
Yeah.
SEO. So how does SEO, how does site speed really affect my SEO, and how does actually Google understand and read your site? I'm a bit more confused of what type of content should I create with it? Where should I go? What should be my focus keywords? That is where, my dilemma is. I'm still stuck.
Yeah, well, there's performance has always been a factor with when it comes to your website. So typically with any website, you want it to perform as fast as it can. When I was talking about AMP earlier, AMP itself isn't a factor in performance, but if you are using AMP in standard mode, I assume you've done some testing. It can make your website faster, so performance itself would be improved. So while AMP isn't directly a factor itself, it can help you get a better high performance website. Also, when you talk about SEO, there's always ongoing developments with the Sitekit plugin. So with Search Console in particular, or even when you install Sitekit now, it asks you different questions. So there are going to be different insights and tips provided within Sitekit. If just that would help you with SEO as well. Are you a WordPress user, Lokesh?
Yes, I use WordPress. Yep.
Yeah. So I would say don't just use Sitekit. You want to always, of course, check different performance. PageSpeed Insights, check your core web vitals. Some of the tips shown in the presentation earlier. Keep on top of those really. And what I always say to people as well is, if you subscribe to the Google Search Central newsletters or check out their blogs, it's a good way to keep on top of trends and tips and changes when it comes to SEO.
Yep, that's very insightful. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. We solved one dilemma. There is another one coming. Okay, so Robert, I've enabled his presenter's mode, but I believe he's not able to join us live. So he's asking, can Sitekit have any negative impact on a WordPress, e.g., security, page performance, or any other?
Yeah. Well, Sitekit only really inserts the snippets on your website. So if, for example, if you implement Tag Manager, you need to be mindful of the tags that you've added to your site on the Tag Manager web interface, because each of those tags will be on your website. You've added the tags via Sitekit, but you've implemented the services on Tag Manager. So I wouldn't say, Google, the Sitekit plugin only inserts the snippets on your website. So just be mindful of what you add using Google Tag Manager. Also, if you find if you have too much ads on your website, maybe you want to consider different monetization strategy. When you install Sitekit and activate AdSense module, we don't have too much options to configure ads, but you can always choose your ad load. There's different basically ad options at the AdSense level, and they will be pulled across to your Sitekit plugin. So security, we haven't heard of any security. I support the Sitekit plugin, and we haven't had any security issues so far. So really, it's a back-end operated plugin. There's not too much it does in the front end of a website. So it doesn't really impact what users see on the front end. Tag manager is probably something you want to consider, but at the same time, Sitekit only inserts your tag manager snippet.
That's a very useful information. I believe a lot of people had the same question, but were probably not find the right person to answer it. But thank you very much. It's really useful to understand if it has any negative impact. And Robert is saying thanks. So Shanta, how about you? Do you have any experience with Sitekit? Have you used it before?
Yeah, I use it. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. No, I use it on most of my sites. I have been, I've actually been using the Lighthouse that you were just talking about through Chrome. I actually just did a brand new fresh install. So I'm doing sort of a baseline to sort of go, here's what I've installed and here's what it comes out to be. So a brand new fresh WordPress install is literally like 99% with no plugins installed, with nothing else.
Wow.
But one thing I've learned recently, and I mentioned it in the chat, is that's only if you run it in an incognito window. Because if you have extensions or other things running in your regular Chrome window, then it can affect the test. Like I've seen it go from 50% to 100% with a brand new fresh install. So, but the Sitekit itself is definitely on my list of things that I use, but I haven't had as much experience with that as I have with Lighthouse.
That's interesting that you when you run the test. I personally like to use tests. Web.dev, web.dev is one way I like to quickly do tests on the website. Similar to PageSpeed Insights, you can do a test, and it's based on Lighthouse as well. And one thing I will say is when you're using a test on your own website, like you said, you see the differences in incognito. Also, I like to tell people, when you're not logged in, when you're doing a test on your website, make sure you're not logged in, because all those features in your admin toolbar could be added to your PageSpeed Insights score, in particular if you're using the Chrome DevTools Lighthouse score.
Well, which is exactly why I use the incognito window, because it automatically is logged out by default. So
okay, that's quite smart.
And so what I like to do when I run my test, I do a lot of technical audits for my clients. So what I will typically run a test on their server, right? Because a lot of times it's the hosting that becomes the issue. I'll run a test on their server. I'll take a copy of it, run it on our server, which is on AWS, and see what the difference is, right? So you get a baseline again. And then what I do is, if I'm running it, like I said, as the Chrome, in the Chrome window, I actually can then print the entire report as a PDF and submit it to them and go, here's what it is. So I'm actually building one right now, and I said, here's the initial install with no plugins, no nothing, brand new. It's this. Yeah.
That's an interesting way to do it. That's really useful as well with the PDF. And that's one of the, like what you do with the PDF. When I use web.dev, I like to use they have a kind of view report. So there's actually, similar to you in your PDF, it's a URL that's publicly available. You can share that with somebody as well.
Yeah, there's a number of options there. I just like the PDF version because it's an actual physical document. You can also do it as an HTML, a JSON, like there's all kinds of ones in there, but I like to have it as a PDF. If I add it to, like, say, my project management documentation afterwards, when I've handed over a project, going, here's all the things, right?
Yeah, interesting.
Thanks.
Nice. Oh no, more than welcome. I'm enjoying myself. I mean, being in marketing, Google Analytics, Google Console, and Google Kits, and everything that goes around Google is something that you have to, if not repeat, then at least try to learn new things. So and actually making the content nowadays has become the base of any type of business, B2B, B2C. So content has become very important. It's not only how we think something should look like or how it should be called, but it's how it is expected and what the trends are. James, tell us something. You didn't mention anything about yourself before we get another question. So I just wanted to ask you if you can tell us where you work and how you actually ended up in IT. Tell us something more about yourself.
Yeah, so I come from I'm from a small town in Ireland, and there wasn't that much web designers in my county. You might say state, we say counties in Ireland. And I always liked all things web, and I started off, like I'm sure many of you guys, web design as a hobby. I did do software engineering in college, but then I started doing websites, and yeah, just expanded from there. And then I had a huge amount of websites from all different. Yeah, they're all small businesses, and lots of them wouldn't have been technically, they might have been, I don't know, schools, butchers. It could have been any different business sector. So I was getting a lot of questions from all different types of people. And then I suppose I enjoyed the website development side more than answering all these questions or even setting up emails and phones. So I suppose, yeah, I ended up deciding maybe I need to do something different, and doing so much small websites, I started trying to do a lot of my own kind of websites, monetize my own websites. I ended up then getting a TVC role at Google. And then from there, I suppose I was lucky enough to get a job at 10up. And I've been supporting WordPress plugins since, doing it. A lot of support with Sidekit, AMP. AMP interests me because, performance is super fast for websites. And yeah, and these days I can be found supporting these type of plugins. But it's what I like to do. And in a different way to doing web design, I'm always on top of all things web design, but I'm not building too much websites like I used to. But I do understand the pain points lots of you guys might have when it comes to
I'm sure you can. And actually, Robert has another question asking, can you give guidance on CLS-related issues with responsive pages, dimensions for images and embedded videos? Is there widely used wrapper code that could predefine an image or a video space?
Well, if you use, I spoke earlier about AMP. AMP is great because you don't need to define images dimensions beforehand. When AMP during runtime, if you're using AMP for WordPress, for example, the plugin will automatically define the width and height. So it's just a lot less calculations, and basically the AMP version of your content will take care of all that without the browser having to calculate. Is there a wisely used wrapper code that predefines an image or video space? Not too sure about a wrapper code. I suppose you could manually, if you're using WordPress, you could manually define your dimensions from there. But I'm not too sure about a specific wrapper code, Robert, unfortunately.
But that's a very good question, right?
It is a very good question, yeah.
From a perspective of a user.
Yeah.
Okay, one chocolate for Robert, because Robert, as a very tedious expert in this, actually understands where his pain points are. Thank you, Robert, for this question, because we just understood that there is perhaps an issue that could be widely addressed. Maybe some other people are asking themselves the same question. Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, I think we've spent let me see, of great time so far. I really wouldn't like to spend too much of anyone's time if we have actually finalized all the questions, and if there are no more questions that we could address. I will wait for a couple of more minutes just to check. In the meantime, I will ask you, first of all, James, not first of all, third of all, because I already asked you 2 times something. So how are you today? How was your day?
My day was great. I was looking forward to this talk, especially after last week's talk. I thought was excellent. So I'll be sure to sign up to the next few. It's great that you have a list of the upcoming ones as well. I think it's super useful for people who are interested in web design, end users, I think, for all the different topics you cover as well. So it's excellent. So I was looking forward to doing this as well, presenting my own. So thanks for the opportunity. And other than that, my day has been going well. I've been doing, again, support, Sidekit support, AMP support. So yeah, a typical Monday for me, really, bar this talk.
Which day works better for you, Monday or Friday?
I like Mondays because I jump into work on a Monday morning. I know I'm going to be super busy, and I kind of enjoy that. I think if I wasn't super busy, I wouldn't like it. So I'm sure, like lots of you guys, when people do web design, they're always busy because there's always something you can be doing. There's always something you can be improving, whether it's performance, whether some pages visually aren't appealing, whether there's monetization. There's always something that will keep you busy when it comes, even if you have one website. You know, there's always improvements you can make. Oh, and there's always new trends, like we talked about web stories. There's also always new things you could think, oh, that might work on my website.
Correct. For the viewers of this video that will be watching this video on YouTube, this is where it ends. We will still say goodbye to each other offline. Thank you very much for watching this episode. And it was a really great pleasure to have you, James, tonight. Our next event is next Monday again, and I hope to see you.
Thanks, guys.